Hey there, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The Treasury Department has announced a little over $900 million in broadband funds through ARPA for 6 states. Be right back and we'll talk about who's getting what. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. This, as I mentioned, is coming through the Treasury Department. And this is part of ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, and specifically the Capital Projects Fund that is part of that plan or that program that passed. We see here Biden-Harris administration announces Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, and Utah to receive nearly $1 billion in American Rescue Plan funds to increase access to affordable high-speed internet. It's actually 900,000,900,000, so just a little over 900 million. The states will use their funding through the Capital Projects Fund to connect more than 180,000 homes and businesses to affordable high-speed internet. Today, the U.S. Department of Treasury announced the approval of broadband projects in additional 6 states under the American Rescue Plan's Capital Fund. A key priority of the Capital Projects Fund program is to make funding available to reliable, affordable broadband infrastructure. Mentions here the Capital Projects Fund provides $10 billion to states, territories, freely associated states, and tribal governments to fund critical capital projects that enable work, education, and health monitoring in response to the public health emergency. In addition to the $10 billion provided by the CPF, many governments are using a portion of their state and local fiscal recovery funds toward meeting the Biden-Harris administration's goal of connecting every American household to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. So ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, that was something that came out in, I think it was signed in March of 2021. And it was in response to the coronavirus pandemic, and specifically, for example, the SLFRF, that's a hard acronym, specifically that's for local fiscal recovery funds. That was for states that, were having issues due to fewer people working and less tax revenue coming in, those kinds of things, and being able to continue to provide services for people in their state. So that's part of what that is. And then the Capital Projects Fund, $10 billion there. So $10 billion in the Capital Projects Fund, that's a lot of money, but let's look here at ARPA in general. So Capital Projects Funds, you see here $10 billion, block grants to each state will get at least $100 million. So each state gets at least $100 million through this. And you can see deploying infrastructure areas that lack reliable wireline speeds of 100 by 20. So basically anything underserved according to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the BEAD program. Anything under 100 by 20 is considered underserved. Anything 25 to 3 or less is considered unserved. So in this case, it's 100 by 20 is what they're targeting, and they're supposed to deliver 100 by 100 where possible, prioritize last mile connections. And there's really not that much difference in the state and local fiscal recovery fund, except the amount. So you see here $10 billion for a Capital Projects Fund, $350 billion for the state and local fiscal recovery fund. So that's 8 times what the BEAD program provides. So that shows you how much money that is. And this was not, when this came out, it wasn't specifically slated for just broadband. I mean, there were other things that states could do with its money, but so many of them are taking that money and putting it towards broadband because that's where one of their biggest needs is. And that became apparent during the pandemic as a lot of people were suddenly, again, either out of work and they needed a broadband connection to be able to find work, or they were having to work from home and their kids were having to be home at school. And it was apparent that a lot of people did not have sufficient broadband at home. A lot of people were able to still get it. They didn't have broadband at home because they didn't necessarily need it, but a lot of people signed up for broadband at that point, and others realized that if they had broadband at home, or they signed up for broadband at home, it was not necessarily sufficient to handle the demand of having the whole family at home trying to do things all at the same time, especially with having to do a lot of upstream traffic that normally would not have been there, doing things like what I'm doing here, a live stream, or more prevalent was Zoom calls, where you had employees at home doing online conference meetings at home, and you had kids trying to do Zoom school, those kinds of things. So all of that became apparent. So that's what the ARPA program was for, again, recovery from the coronavirus. But you can see the amount of money here. And this particular, again, this release right here is talking just about the capital projects fund, the 10 billion. So let's look at what the states are getting here. Let's see, here it says, in accordance with Treasury guidelines, each state's plan requires service providers to participate in the FCC Affordable Connectivity Program. So that's part of this. They have to be able to, they have to provide that subsidy if they're going to get this money. Eligible experts estimate that nearly 40% of U.S. households are eligible for the program. So that's a lot of households that can get the ACP. The ACP, that's the program that provides, you see here, up to $30 per month or $75 per month subsidy, $75 if you're on tribal lands. So that money goes, that the service providers that sign up for this then provide that discount to those users that qualify for the ACP, and that service provider gets paid back by the government through the ACP. So that was $14.2 billion. That was part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And with 15 million people signed up, and there's lots of programs coming out right now. The FCC has a pilot program they just did notice a funding opportunity for. They've got other grant programs for promoting the ACP. So this money is not going to last forever. It's going to be a year and a half, 2 years, probably, with this number of people on it. But this program will help for that period of time, and it may be extended by Congress at some point, either temporary extension or permanent extension. We'll have to see what happens. But they do have to participate in the ACP. Mentions here to date, 22 states have approved to invest nearly $3 billion of CPF funding in affordable, reliable, high-speed internet, which those states estimate will reach more than 700,000 locations. And then specifically in this particular announcement, we've got Florida, $248 million to connect 48,400 households and businesses, representing, they say, approximately 10% of locations still lacking high-speed internet. And this will fund Florida's Broadband Infrastructure Program, or BIP. It's to prioritize fiber optic networks with speeds of 100 by 100. Plan submitted to Treasury and being approved today represents 68% of the state's total allocation under the CPF. So Florida, it says here, Florida submitted plans for the remainder of their CPF funds, and these applications are currently under review by Treasury. So they've submitted 100% of what they can get, and what's being awarded today is 68%. So again, each state gets a minimum of $100 million. And I forgot to mention on the, how is this fiscal recovery, this $350 million allocated to each state? That's allocated based on some kind of formula related to shortfalls in budgets and those kinds of things the states have to look at. So it's specific to how much recovery the state needed. So all of that over, like a 3-year period, it had to be calculated. So there's not a defined number there that I can give you on how much each state gets for that. You see here, Georgia, also a big one. I think this was the highest, $250 million, 70,000 households and businesses. That represents 15% of locations still lacking high-speed internet in Georgia, and that will fund the Georgia Capital Projects Fund Grant Program, also again 100 by 100. So these are all designated for that. That represents 96% of the state's total allocation under the program. So there's still, looks like 4% that's being under review by Treasury. So they've submitted the remainder right there. Iowa, $152.2 million. That's 18,972 households and businesses. That represents approximately 16% locations still lacking high-speed internet. That'll fund their Empower Rural Iowa Broadband Program. So one thing you're seeing is that all the states have these programs to be able to distribute these funds that they're getting through the federal government, which is good. I did a broadcast yesterday about Pennsylvania. They just came out with their state broadband plan. So very important that these states, have these programs in place so they can get this money, and they have all of the resources and infrastructure and whatever they need in place to be able to get this money out to the final service providers that are going to be the grantees, sub-grantees, I should say. Again, 100 by 100. So that represents 100% of what Iowa's supposed to get, that $152.2 million. Minnesota, $44 million for broadband infrastructure. We'll fund 2 additional broadband infrastructure programs: Minnesota's line extension program and their low density pilot program. This one doesn't say how many households and businesses are going to be served by this $44 million. So maybe that's not determined yet. Again, 100 by 100 symmetrical. It does say here, in total, Minnesota is using $127 million, or 70% of their CPF funding for broadband infrastructure to reach an estimated 32,000 locations, which is 12% of the locations still lacking high-speed internet access. They've submitted plans for the remainder, 30%, I guess, of their CPF funds. So it doesn't say where this 44 million specifically is going, but it gives you kind of the total here, the 127 million and 32,000 locations right there. Missouri, 196.7 million. That's supposed to connect 37,979 households and businesses. That represents approximately 8% of locations still lacking high-speed internet and will fund the Missouri Broadband Infrastructure Grant Program. 100 by 100, representing 100% of the state's allocations. So that 196.7 million is 100% of what they're supposed to get. Then you've got Utah, only 10 million in this round, 3,080 households and businesses. That represents 5% of locations still lacking high-speed internet. So it looks like they don't have a lot of locations that are lacking internet based on that. And looking at some of these other numbers, that's going to their Broadband Infrastructure Gap Networks program, again 100 by 100. And what's being approved today represents 7% of the state's total allocation under the CPF program. They've submitted plans for the remainder of the funds. So they're getting 7% of those. They still have 93% funds. So they got their 10 million, and there's another 93% they can get from that. So they're just getting started with those funds. So I always like to look at how far this money is going, and also how much per location. So I did some quick math here. So again, Florida getting 248 million with the 48,000 approximately locations. That's about $5,000 or $5,124 per location. And that's, these are all reasonable numbers. I don't know if in these state grant programs, if there are any matches. I don't believe there's a match required on these ARPA programs, but that doesn't mean that the state can't require a match as they go through these competitive grant programs. So it could be that this $5,000 in the Florida program, for example, will go further than that if there's a 25% match or a 50% match, something like that. But in any event, there's $5,000 that can go towards connecting up all of these 48,000 plus homes. Now, obviously, some homes and businesses are going to be more than others. Some might be 10,000 or even 20,000 to connect up a home that's in a rural area, maybe has a long driveway, those kinds of things. And some might be 3,000, 2,000. It all depends on where these locations are. But that's the average. So we've got Georgia 250 million, 70,000 locations, about 3,000, about 3,500 per location. Iowa 152 million again, 18,972 locations, and that's $8,022 per location. So that's in the high end there, and you can see that in Iowa, again, kind of farm country. You're going to have fewer customers per mile, or in a lot of cases, it's really many miles per customer. So it's going to be very expensive. Fiber, for example, to get those long distances, it's expensive to get that installed. It's expensive to maintain because you got fewer miles for maintaining that network as well. Then you've got Minnesota. Again, we don't know the numbers there. It's the 44 million. We don't know the number of locations or the amount per location for this particular disbursement that they're getting. Now that the numbers that we looked at, what was it, 127 million and 30,000? What was it? Hold on here. Minnesota, 127 million and 32,000 locations. That works out, I did the math on that one, that worked out to about $4,000 per location if you looked at what their total was. Then you've got Missouri, $196.7 million, 37,979 locations, and $5,179 per location. And then finally, Utah, that $10 million is going to cover, again, that 3,000 plus locations for $3,247. So you can see here it varies, and these are reasonable numbers, especially if there's a match. And again, more or less, it's some places are going to be more, some are going to be less. So that makes a big difference right there. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Again, there's lots of money out there now. We're all anticipating the future funds through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, specifically the BEAD program part of that. There's $42.45 billion waiting to be dispersed on that, but there's a lot that has to happen, including getting the final FCC maps available in the spring, and then the whole process of getting states to get their 5-year plans in, the NTIA to review that, the states to get the sub-grantees to provide applications to them and work all of that out. It's probably going to be late next year, if not early in 2024, before we really start to see a lot of those funds come out. So we'll have to wait on that. But here's a lot of money that's going to be going towards broadband. And don't forget that all of this money that's going towards this broadband will be taking areas off of the map. So these funds, as they're being distributed, these are going towards known projects in known areas, and those known projects in known areas may be unserved now, but as far as the FCC map goes, those should not show up as unserved, I don't believe, because the FCC is supposed to take into account all federal program dollars that are going to be applied, because we don't want to be double funding something, right? So if there's already, $250 million going to Georgia for specific areas, those areas are not going to be eligible for the BEAD funds, even if they're not finished being built out by the time the BEAD funds are eventually allocated. And it's very possible they won't be built out by the time the maps come out, right? Because there's going to be a lot that's going to have to get done. They could start the building process, but so I'm not sure how the FCC is going to handle those. Maybe they'll show up on the map in a different way, where it shows pending build or something like that, to show that while those areas are unserved, there is a project that's been allocated to that area. So I'm not sure how they'll handle that. It'll be interesting to see. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, click the little bell to be notified when I'm live. If this was interesting or helpful, if you would give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care.